Here we see Newton's first law in action where the ball is in motion until it makes contact with the crossbar. Once it does, there is an opposite reaction because the ball does not have enough mass or force to keep going in the same direction. Therefore, the ball's acceleration decreases as soon as it hits the crossbar and returns in the same direction it comes from.
Galileo's law of inertia is seen here because as the ball is kicked in the air, there are various forces acting on it. When the ball makes contact with Angel's foot, it acts as a force which causes the ball to move up. But gravity is also a force that is always making contact with the ball, and we see this when the ball eventually decreases in velocity and returns to the ground.
Oh my gosh, I'll become a goofy goober when it comes to physics. Next, we see Newton's second law as it pertains to mass. The more mass an object has, the less acceleration it exhibits compared to an object with less mass and the same amount of force. We see this with two different sized balls. The larger the ball travels, the least amount of distance, because it had the least amount of acceleration compared to that of the smaller ball. This proves that objects with a larger mass have less acceleration than objects with a smaller mass when you apply the same amount of force, because mass and acceleration are inversely proportional. In other words, the larger the mass, the lesser acceleration, as stated in our notes.
Last but not least, we see an example of unbalanced forces as the soccer ball makes contact with the bouncy ball. It is an unbalanced force because the soccer ball has more force to that of the bouncy ball that is at rest. Therefore, when they make contact, both balls go in the same direction as the ball with the larger force, which is the soccer ball. If they were balanced forces, each ball would go in the opposite direction it was originally traveling at.
Imagine, it's the 2018 NBA Finals, and it's the last 10 seconds of the game, and your teammate makes a shot like this. You might ask yourself, I don't know what to hear about this shot, man. Here's how. In this example, Russell Westbrook is shooting an air ball, and this is because he did not have an appropriate amount of horizontal or vertical motion in order to make the shot. We see it demonstrated when Jordan shoots the ball, with too much vertical motion, but not enough horizontal motion. Next, he has too much horizontal motion, but not vertical motion, until finally Dalen finds an appropriate amount of vertical and horizontal motion to make the basket. The equation to be found, the vertical motion is 1/2 acceleration times squared. Horizontal motion is horizontal velocity times vxt, also demonstrated.
Newton's third law, dribbling. Dribbling is one of the most essential parts of basketball. Arguably the best dribbler in basketball, Steph Curry, is seen warming up with his infamous pregame warm-up drill. But from a scientific perspective, he's explaining a good representation of Newton's third law, which states that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. In this case, Steph and I are throwing the ball downward until it makes contact with the floor and comes back in the opposite direction. According to Newton's third law, the ball should come back with the same force it was initially thrown at. A way to show this is through a free body diagram. In this diagram, the arrows are the same length, which represents that the ball is being thrown and received with the same amount of force, which is exactly what Newton's third law states.
The average basketball player runs about 3 miles per game, which exposes them to a pretty high risk of injury. A way professional NBA players try to reduce the risk of injury is by taping up their ankles or wearing slip-resistant basketball shoes. Here we see the consequences of not having an appropriate amount of friction between you and the basketball court. You could severely injure yourself and end your career. A way we can see this is by comparing the speed of a basketball player with and without basketball shoes. Here we clearly see that the player with the basketball shoes is faster than the player without. This is due to friction because it acts as a secondary force acting in the opposite direction, which helps movement. If both frictional force and net force act in the opposite direction and they have a total force of 0, it allows the most productive amount of acceleration. We can calculate the impact of force by dividing the force of friction by the force exerted by the surface on the object, which is also known as the mu.
There have been some pretty epic assists over the years in basketball. And pardon my French, but these passes are so freaking sauce. Hey, saucy sauce. Sauce with the sauce. Like, get lost in the sauce. Like, too much sauce. Hey. Anyhow, science has a pretty big role in all these scrumptious passes. For example, as soon as the ball leaves the player's hand, it is exerting kinetic energy. But after it bounces off of the ground and towards the player, it's exerting potential energy. And this entire process
it is undergoing the same amount of energy, just in different forms. That's crazy, bro. Like, no cap, John. That's pretty crazy, John. Like, no cap. There are different types of potential energy, which include gravitational potential energy and elastic potential energy. Get ready for all these formulas. GPE is calculated by multiplying mass, acceleration due to gravity, and the height. EPE is found through 1/2 kx squared, and last but not least, kinetic energy is through 1/2 mv squared.
Now for the littest part, the dunks. Yes, sir. Dunking might seem to be one of the hardest things to pull off in the game, but from a scientific point of view, with the right factors, it's not that complicated. It has a lot to do with the conservation of energy. As you can see, all of these players dunking have their knees bent in the beginning in order to jump high enough to make the dunk. This can be referred to them expressing their elastic potential energy. After the ready position, the player bodies shoots upward towards the rim in the basket. In the meanwhile, energy is being converted from elastic potential energy to gravitational kinetic energy. A way to easily demonstrate this is by using a graph. We can use the graph to see that all the energy in the starting position is elastic potential energy. Then during the launch position, it converts to gravitational and kinetic energy. And lastly, when they get to the peak position, they dunk that guy. No cap. All the energy is gravitational at that point forward.